Friends, what if I told you there are 3 simple oil paint techniques that will instantly make your model stand out? You only need 5 tones for this magic trick, dark brownish shades for washes, and a few lighter ones for oil dot filters and forced contrasts. The main downside of oils is, well, the oil. But that's also what makes them special, and we can control it with a dry cardboard palette. The porous surface soaks up the excess oil and doubles as our workspace. There are several hacks for this workflow, such as double-sided tape that prevents the cardboard palette moving around at the workbench, but we're keeping it basic tonight. Check out how the dark oils seem pretty much dry, and that the only wet paint seems to be light mud. However, let's keep them like this for 2 hours and see what's changed.
2 hours later.
And suddenly, they don't seem so dry anymore, do they? For thinning, you can use a dedicated modeling thinner, or live dangerously like me and grab industrial white spirit. Just test it somewhere first, because if it melts your paint job, that's on you. With paintbrushes, especially when it comes to washes, my choice is pretty simple. A long bristled synthetic liner for application and a smaller pointy one for blending. Of course, we'll need a metal palette for the thinner. I like to have 2 pools, one for cleaning, the other for blending. I'm thinning the oil washes directly on the cardboard. It's more convenient, although harder to tell you the accurate thinning ratio. But for the first layer, it should be something like this. Smooth flowing and not too opaque. A global wash is easiest to show on the wheels. Just slap it over everything and the gloss surface will pull it into corners and around details all on its own. If it looks too easy, that's because it is. It's the perfect end of session technique. Apply it and then let the model dry overnight. But make sure to stick around for a few minutes after application. Sometimes washes can darken the surface too much, and that's not good. A quick pass with a clean brush will fix that. Now that you've seen the basic approach and how I thin oils on the palette, let's move on to the tank itself. On large flat surfaces, a global wash works a lot like a filter. In both cases, we flood the entire area with diluted paint. The difference is in the intent. With filters, we're aiming for an even coat with 0 pooling. With a global wash, pooling is the whole point, letting it collect in corners and recesses while gently shifting the overall tone. That's one reason I prefer painting my models in pale, desaturated colors. Every technique that follows will darken them slightly. In fact, in the last episode, I sealed the model with a glossy varnish for the first time in years. This wash is the first step in knocking down that showroom look. The trade-off? A smooth gloss coat gives the paint nothing to grip onto, so it takes longer to dry. And keep an eye out on excessive pooling. Gravity loves to pull the wash towards the lower edges, but a quick wipe or redistribution with a clean brush will fix that. Timurit is perfect for this. Its jagged texture pops beautifully under a light wash without making the model look overly grimy. And because I sealed it with satin varnish earlier, the paint bites harder here. Generally speaking, the main goal of this technique is to bring out those subtle textures without darkening the model or making it look unnatural. It also creates some initial weathering thanks to the gritty, mottled finish. When you step back and look at the model as a whole, the change is subtle, but it's definitely there. The shadows are a bit deeper, there's a hint of dirt in the corners, and the overall tone has shifted ever so slightly. Once I was happy with it, I set the model aside for a good 12-hour nap to let everything cure before moving on. For the pin wash, I used the darker industrial earth oil paint. The consistency needs to flow easily, but it can be a bit more opaque than the global wash. As the name implies, this is a precise, targeted wash, applied only around prominent details and deep recesses. Using it as a global wash would make the whole model look too dark and grimy. But the darker color doesn't have to give the same result everywhere. We can control the effect with thinner or build it up in layers for more punch. This is where the long bristled liner brush shines. It's sharp enough for precision, but holds enough paint to avoid constant reloading. The only drawback is the drying time. You just can't apply a pin wash right after a global wash, or you're just blend them together and lose control. Even with 12 hours of drying over a glossy coat, I had to work carefully to avoid this. It's not the most efficient workflow if you like to power through a whole day at the workbench, but spread over 2 evenings it's much more manageable. Blending can go 2 ways. You can aim for a perfectly clean, tight look where every recessed line is crisp, or you can leave subtle stains that add to the weathered, dirty feel. I usually go for the latter. Oil paints make this especially easy because they blend much smoother than enamels. And if mixing your own oils feels intimidating, enamel washes are a safe starting point. They're pre-mixed with just the right consistency and opacity. This step is basically a recap of the first technique, but tighter, darker, and much more controlled. The difference is huge, and now it's impossible to miss all the details popping out. Time to let the model dry again for another 12 hours and check on our oils. After a few days, they might look bone dry, but don't get fooled. Scratch the surface with a sharp tool and you'll find plenty of usable paint inside. Add a few drops of thinner and they're as good as new. And with that, we can move on to the final stage, the oil dot filter. Now, the term filter can be a bit misleading. I used to call this process fading because, well, it makes the surface look faded. But since it also lays down a translucent film of paint that changes the look of the camouflage, it's technically a filter too. Back in the day, this was usually done before the pin wash because it's messy and it's not exactly a precise job. Now I prefer to do it after the washes for one simple reason. It tones them down in places, which makes the result look much more natural. On horizontal surfaces, the standard approach is to blend the oil dots with a large, round, preferably ancient paintbrush using a tapping or stippling motion for that cloudy, irregular finish. But this isn't just about throwing random colors around. You can also work more strategically. For example, targeting some of the darker areas with that pin wash color and blending them gently with an almost dry brush to create subtle tonal variations. On vertical or angled surfaces, the method is pretty much the same, although it's generally good practice to keep the lightest tones towards the top and the darker ones toward the bottom. Not mandatory, but it's good. Besides, I've got another trick for that, just in a moment. For blending, I prefer a large, flat brush. The amount of thinner you use makes a big difference. I keep mine slightly moist so it leaves visible streaks of blended paint, like the surface has been affected by rain. It's an easy way to add texture, and if it comes out too strong, a completely dry brush will knock it back down. Artificial highlights are also simple, and this is that trick I talked about. Take a light sandy tone or pure white, hit the upper edges, and blend them quickly with a short, stiff brush that's bone dry. It's the oil paint version of post shading with an airbrush, but grittier and less uniform. In a good way, of course. Small details can get the same treatment with diluted oils, and it's also a neat fix for overly heavy washes on those flame-cut armor edges. And for those cramped or shadowy spots, just dab in some dark oil paint and you've got instant dirt stains or fake shadows. Whatever fancy name you want to call them when your friends ask what's wrong with your model. Let me show it to you one more time but fully sped up. There's a lot of flexibility in this method because you can remove pretty much all of the effect with enough thinner, and on the other hand, if the result isn't strong enough or it's not balanced, we can add more oils and repeat the procedure. Now for a slightly artsy-fartsy move. Adding contrast between the interlocking plates with yellow and white oils. This part is totally subjective, but in my experience it's better to go a little overboard here because chipping and dust will tone it all back down later. In other words, I find it better to have the model slightly more cheerful after this stage because the next stages will make it sadder. Timorate is always tricky, no matter what effect you're blending over it, and with oil dots, it's pretty much impossible to blend them in that clean vertical motion. So I just find it better to move them around, let them pull in some of the ridges, and leave it like that. And finally, for smaller fiddly bits, like the wheels and other subassemblies, I just speckled the paints heavily diluted, almost like dirty thinner. Most of it will disappear under mud and dust later, but it's worth doing so the whole model keeps a consistent finish. Plus, you can claim that you take no shortcuts when it comes to weathering on your models. So that's it for tonight, my friends. Washes, in my book, are non-negotiable. Oil dots and artificial contrast, those are more in the personal taste category, but these three techniques don't demand surgeon-level precision like chipping does, and they'll still give your finish a big upgrade. Back when I was more active on modeling shows, I was invited to judge a few times, and the first thing that caught my eye, even from across the table, was whether the model had a proper wash, and if the surfaces had been broken up with oils or some other effects. You'd be amazed how many modelers skip the pin wash entirely and jump straight into pigments and mud. I mean, that's totally okay, don't get me wrong, but if you're trying to push your finishes a little further, trying and practicing these methods might be the best start. We haven't painted anything damaged so far, no scratches in the paint job or rust stains, yet the model already has that used, dirty look. Also, it's a great way of making the model really interesting if you're planning to keep the chipping or earth effects subtle. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Next time we'll make the Sturmtiger battle-worn with chipping and we'll also replicate heavy damage at the back where it received several armor-piercing rounds. I wouldn't be able to run my channel full-time without my patrons. Their help allows me to carry a giant canister of white spirit everywhere I go, and if you're one of them, thank you so much, because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be doing these videos full-time. My Patreon is honestly the best place where only the coolest kids come to hang out. I post regular updates, share work in progress photos, various thoughts and observations from the workbench, and we keep in touch through DMs, comments, and emails, and we're keeping it really cool. Top tier patrons get early access to all of my videos, completely ad-free, and they stay there forever, so if you like listening to them while you're modeling, it's the best thing ever. There are also bonus extras like 3D printable parts for your own projects, reference photos from real-life locations, and high-res studio photos of my models that show way more detail than video ever could. Your financial support is appreciated, but never expected. It seems to me that the painting of this model will be concluded in the next two videos, even though we're not even technically halfway there, but I think the result will be pretty interesting. And remember, build your models, don't just hoard them. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!